Welcome back to the Better by Nature podcast, where we are talking with folks who have inspiring stories of overcoming adversity by relying on natural remedies. On this episode, Courtney Morey is back to continue her story about how her experience with her daughter Annie drew her into advocacy in the medical parent community. Annie's story has impacted many lives and helped Courtney create lifelong relationships with other parents that are going through similar challenges. Before we get started, this episode is brought to you by Life Leaf Remedies. At Life Leaf Remedies, we are passionate about making natural remedies that help you feel better today. Check us out at lifeleafremedies.com. Now, I hope you'll enjoy this episode of the Better by Nature podcast and feel better today, y'all. Welcome back to the Better by Nature podcast, Courtney Morey. It is a privilege to sit down and just get this amount of time with you because I know how busy you are, and to be able to continue the story that we started before. I don't even know where to start. I know we had like an hour-long conversation about, what are the things that we want to get into, and but I know that, last time we got into, the diagnosis,
Right.
what was coming for you and Spencer with Annie, from Down syndrome to the heart issues and those things that y'all needed to brace for and kind of gear up for, right? And then what the experience was going through it, and the ups and the downs and the really dark places and, some of the brightest places that have emerged.
Yes.
So, we talked about a little bit. Now you took us through kind of that experience with ECMO and all of that, but then we really started talking about the journey of your advocacy, and you mentioned before that your advocacy journey really started with Annie almost from day one.
Pregnancy.
Right, and you said it like announcing it to everybody and being
Right.
kind of learning how to talk about it. I think was a little bit of that.
Just setting the tone so that, we just learned that a lot of people don't know. And so it really how the parents and family members speak of it and set the tone, people will follow, or you at least give them the opportunity to. So yeah, that did start the day we shared with everyone her diagnosis. Of course, we told friends and family first, but when we announced it on social media in written form, and yeah, the advocacy has not slowed down by any means. There's so much I could share. Sometimes I don't know where to start because so much has been packed in from where we left off from the ECMO trial during her open heart surgery stay to today. And her second birthday is in 3 weeks. So Annie's lived a lot of life almost 2 years, and she's maybe taken a little off mine.
Hopefully not.
No, just kidding. She's made my life 100 times richer.
Yeah.
So yeah, we left off with Dr. Tam trialing her off of life support.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really only a week into our stay. We ended up staying right over 2 months. So there was so much more just in her open heart surgery recovery. What we want to...
One thing that stood out to me that might be a good place to jump off was when you and Spencer realized what Wells was going through.
Yes.
And you realized you needed to take some action there. And that story just led to even more, right?
I know. It just keeps going. So pretty much it is impossible to balance taking care of a child in the ICU and another child, or for many families, multiple other children at home.
Yeah.
You just do your best, but it takes a lot of outside help. But when Spencer and I realized, and I can't remember exactly how far into her ICU stay we were, but we realized that Wells was at a point where we needed to spend more time with him, and the three of us hadn't spent a night at home together at that point. And So, it was always either it was the circus of me being at the hospital and Spencer being home, or switching, and just all of the craziness and car seat swapping that came along with that. And so I had a conversation with her intensivist about if she was in a place where we could do that, where we could both stay home and leave her overnight. And that was a very hard decision to make, because we had almost lost her. And so, yeah, basically having to choose between kids who needs us most, one physically, one emotionally. So the intensivist assured us that he thought she was in a good place. We set up a whole entire plan with Annie's night nurse, and it was actually a nurse we'd never had before. And I didn't even get to meet her. So what happened was Spencer came home, and, we told the nurse, should anything change, both of our phones are on ring. Please call at any hour. This is hard for us to step away, but we need to do it for our son. And never got a call. So I remember driving in back up to the hospital, just feeling good. And I got there, I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it must have been after 6:30 a.m. because that's when shift changes. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of people in Annie's room, and they had changed the oxygen support. She was no longer on high flow. I think she was on a CPAP, so I could just tell by looking at her
something
before I even spoke to anyone. And it was awful. And so immediately people, I start asking questions, because they didn't realize, the rest of the staff didn't realize, that night shift hadn't called me. And I was just not okay. At that point, I don't think I had somehow, even when she was on ECMO, I don't think I'd openly just broken down in front of the whole staff. And I did. And I just remember sitting on the little couch bed in the room, and we had a really wonderful nurse, and she came up to me and she was like, Courtney, can I call the therapist for you? And I'm thinking, okay, which therapist? I'm thinking respiratory therapist,
right,
physical therapist, occupational therapist. What therapist does she mean? And she said, no, the clinical therapist for you. And I said, what are you talking about? That is available to me? And she said, yes, you didn't know that? And I almost couldn't even speak, because, here my child has been like the most critical kid in the unit. We've gone through so much. I had been going outside, sitting in the freezing February weather, to meet with a therapist that my friends had found for me.
And when you say freezing February weather, this was the once-in-a-century blizzard that came through Texas.
It was.
Let's not gloss over that, right? That was wild.
That's a whole nother part of the CISU's day, was when Texas lost power and the ice storm. And I was literally trapped in the hospital for, it was either 3 or 4 days. Staff couldn't come in and out. You couldn't even go outside to get fresh air. Yeah, that was a whole nother
that was wild
part of the story. But yeah, I could not believe that resource existed. And I hadn't been thinking about myself. Everything was about Annie. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't think to ask for it. I was just, surviving. And so I was just a wreck that no one had thought to bring that up. So
after weeks there already.
Correct.
This wasn't your first day.
Right. Yeah, no, not at all. So our wonderful nurse went and got the manager of the CICU and the charge nurse, and we had a little meeting right then and there, and they were in total agreement. It was a total flaw in the system. I couldn't believe that there was a specific role for that, for the heart unit, which there's the CICU, and then just down the walkway is the step-down unit, which is where kids go after when they're less critical. And so, at that point, I denied getting help from that person because obviously the circumstances I had already started with a different therapist, and, even though it had only been 3 weeks, it was like a lifetime of things that had happened. And so since then, there is now, built into the system, if a child is ever on ECMO, it's automatically flagged that those parents should get an immediate visit from that staff member. And I hated that, it had to be us to go through it, but I was so grateful that change was made. They handled it so well. They really, empathize, sympathize, and made a change. So that was literally the only negative thing to happen. Like, I want to be sure that everyone knows that I think we've now stayed in the hospital in different units, and the level of excellency and care, nothing compares to the CICU. The intensivists, the nurses, and so...
I think the word you used earlier was elite, right?
Yes. And, that's what you want.
Yeah,
of course.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to just share that and that just be everyone's impression of this ICU, because that just happened to be a big advocacy moment,
right.
That I hope it makes positive impact on families to come. But yes, that was just the beginning of realizing how much speaking up mattered, even when you can't find the words, just pushing through and sharing, because something I've also learned is that I think the reason a lot of change doesn't happen is because when parents go through this, the last, your battery is already so low. Sometimes you just don't have the capacity to fight it or put in the extra time because your child needs you. But for whatever reason, the way God made me, I can't not.
No, I think that's awesome. What a good way to put it too. You can't not.
Mm-hmm,
and I think that there's a lot of moms out there that would like to thank you for that.
Well, I feel like God made me for Annie and vice versa. It's just, she gives me so much purpose, and I really was so much. She has changed me in so many ways, especially like the speaking up and speaking out. Because when it's your child, you'll do anything for your child,
right.
And
you don't even think about it. You just act.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, that was just one of the ones that stood out during that time. But
so when that happened, was that, and maybe even in retrospect, was that kind of an aha moment for you that like, oh, I've got work to do here. It's not just
I don't even
these
know.
folks
I think I was
told me
probably
about my
like,
resources.
oh my gosh, what's next? Because there was still so much recovery for Annie after that point. We ended up having to go back in and do a heart catheterization. I don't think I was really thinking about it. I think it was just like taking on each day, and it didn't stop. I remember the day we were discharged. It was at the end of March, and I felt this pressure, like the day you leave the hospital is all balloons and like everything's better, everything's over. And it was actually one of the hardest days I can remember. I felt so like unseen because insurance denied us getting any nursing help. And I had just spent months with my child having full-time nursing care.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly I'm coming home and Annie came home on, it was either 13 or 14 medications. My friend who leads pharmacy at Baylor Dallas came over and created this color code chart so I didn't mess it up. I mean, it was a crash course into becoming a nurse. Both her medications and her feeding journey, and we can talk more about that. But her feeding journey then became my life's work. And it was very hard to come home because it was just on me. We ended up having 2 nurses who, one was at our children's hospital and the other was a L&D nurse at another hospital in town. And we just, paid them privately for help. Yeah. Because, insurance would not. And I just, had to have help. I had to. And they, Nurse Abby, Nurse Emma, most people know who they are, saved my sanity. Just, each of them came about once a week. So really they're full-time nurses.
That's not so like a 40-hour-week job. Yeah.
Right. Well, for them to give us their time was a sacrifice. And so that was a big support factor.
Right. Yeah, that's huge. And I think that's interesting that you say that as far as the day that you left. Mm-hmm. Because from an outsider's perspective, it's definitely viewed as like, yay, this is the celebratory moment.
Yeah.
And so
I can remember feeling pressure to share photos and I mean, of course I wanted to, but I also remember coming home with all of her stuff and just getting her prescriptions filled and sorting through the new pharmacy that was in my kitchen.
Oh gosh.
I, and still being mom to Wells and, all of his needs and all of us under the same roof again and, buying groceries. It was a hard transition.
It sounds like a lot. I mean, I think about, you say 14. I'm trying to think, if I tried to drink 14 cups of water in a day, that would be tough, right? 14 of anything in a day is not
Luckily,
easy.
there were, they all, trickled away. There were some that we were just on the last bit of, and it takes me back. Mm-hmm.
So then when you were in that point, is that where you started to feel some of the support of your community, that medical mamas community that you've...
I mean, they helped me through the hospital stay so much before. I mean, they were always there.
It's almost like pregnancy. There was never a gap in that support.
I was able to connect with more local moms because, so much of my pregnancy group, that was just a Facebook group, and almost none of the moms were in Texas. I'm trying to remember. But yes, then I was able to connect with, more moms locally, and I needed that. I needed people here, people that were in the same hospital system, were in the same therapies. So that, yes, that is true. So
how did you come out of that? Right. So this, we keep asking this question, and I think you've got multiple of these moments, but that feels like one of those moments, maybe not as extreme as when you were in the chapel at the hospital, but one of those, how do you just take a step forward kind of moment?
There was no coming out of it. It was, the train never stopped. It was just
just the scenery changed,
blast,
essentially.
Yes, because when we came home, after everything that happened, all that did was add the number of physicians that Annie needed to be seen by.
Oh, geez.
So not only was the lack of nursing help so hard, but then getting in the car and traveling with those medications, traveling with a feeding tube. Yeah. And there's another story, but I don't know if if we're going to do it on this episode.
Well,
yeah, it was just, there was no slowing down.
Yeah.
There were so many different doctors to see. Now we're at the point where, you know, we've been able to be checked off by so many, and so much has slowed down. I mean, Annie started school. The biggest thing in our world right now is that Annie started school a week and a half ago. And that has been a major change in our life, because I have gone from being 24/7 mom and caretaker and therapist and nurse and driver and everything to she's in school from drop-offs between 7:30 and 8:30 and pickups at 2:45. It's a full day.
Yeah.
And it's 5 days a week. And getting her to that point has been huge. And so it's a big change for her. It's a big change for me and Spencer. The school she's in is incredible. It is a preschool. It's a lab school off of TCU. TCU is where Spencer and I both went to college.
Mm-hmm.
And did he share in the episode he did?
A little bit.
Did he share about Kinder Frogs?
A little bit, but
Okay.
That was before she had started.
Oh, yeah. This is when we were...
Yeah. Good update time now, right? Now you're a week and a half in.
From 18 to 22 years old, Spencer, his fraternity, was extremely involved in Kinder Frogs. And Kinder Frogs is a preschool for children with Down syndrome. The entire purpose and goal is to prepare them for the public school system.
Mm-hmm.
To, you know, whatever their abilities are, to... you know, reach them to their highest potential. And it is a very small school. So getting a spot, it's hard because, you know, some of our friends didn't get in. They didn't get a spot because there's so many families that went in.
Yeah.
So for Annie to have a spot was a huge deal, but also at the same time very hard because, as you know, our community is so tight.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Spencer spent a lot of college volunteer. He even did a big fundraiser for them as his like senior project. So when we got her diagnosis, that was a huge deal, and he just knew so much more than I did. So
now she
went on the list when I was 17 weeks pregnant. We couldn't even fill out half the application because it was like date of birth. We don't know. You know, so much was unknown. So she started a week and a half ago. She has only been in school, I think she's had 9 school days, and you can already tell the impact of like the social impact and just, it's school, but it's like therapy 24/7, and the way the classroom is set up, and it's just amazing. So it's hard to be away from her, but it also has allowed me, like today, I was able, as you know, to go up to our children's hospital and have a meeting that was long overdue. Because the biggest challenge, and I know I touched on this earlier, is to be in it and to be caring for your child when they need so much, when they're still recovering, and speaking up, because there is so little time. I mean, I've had to pay nurses to care for my children so I could go and advocate, and not everyone can do that, and I'm fully aware. But also, like I said earlier, I feel like there's so much that I've been blessed with, you know, having those nurses, who my husband is, the incredible person he is, his job and the insurance it supplies us and the income it supplies us. I feel like if I didn't take advantage of these opportunities, it just wouldn't be right.
Yeah. Well,
So.
and we've jumped pretty far ahead.
I know.
And I want to dive into this meeting today, but I also want to go back and talk a little bit about that journey in between for Annie,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the things that was so important, and we talked about it earlier, for you, for Annie, and just kind of along the lines of the ideas of natural remedies, was her diet.
Yes.
Right. And you were given one option, which is so strange. And it's 2022. There's more than one option for pretty much anything. Right. So how is it, and I guess this was 2021 to be fair, but how is it that in that position, so now and I'll let you kind of go into the details of it, but it was a digestive thing, right? Or
yes.
gastrointestinal,
GI.
right? Yeah. And you get to this point, you've gone through all this stuff. What a warrior Annie is with her heart and all the things that she's overcome. And now her diet is starting to become the problem and the mystery, maybe. And how frustrating it is, again, for me as an observer, to hear that you were given one option as a solution, which one is not approved for infant use, but two, not approved for long-term use.
So
but that was the option.
We're going to have to go back. And so feeding Annie, I think I said, became my life's work.
Right.
And that was because, first of all, feeding can be a challenge to children with Down syndrome, because the hypotonia, the low muscle tone, affects the muscles in their mouth, the muscles in their throat. And you add in heart failure to that as an infant, and it's very hard to suck, swallow, breathe. So bottle feeding for Annie from the beginning it was like this terrible cycle, because to have surgery, she had this weight goal. It was like she needs to eat to have surgery.
Yeah.
But she can't eat because she needs surgery.
Oh, man.
So it's every child with a heart defect's biggest challenge. Weight gain is. Feeding is this huge pediatric need, or pediatric challenge that I was not aware of before Annie. And it's not just children with Down syndrome. It's so many moms and parents I've connected with. Their children do not have Down syndrome, and they've shared their struggles, and we've, put our heads together. And anyways, yes, Annie's feeding challenges started from the beginning because she was in heart failure. Well, after all the trauma her little body went through from her recovery, she developed a terrible oral aversion where, so she was on a ventilator for, I don't exactly know how long, but for a long time. Mm-hmm. And the combination of having a breathing tube down her throat, being fed with a tube down her nose to the back of her throat, that went in. She was fed through an IV for a long time. So I think that she was on the NG tube from early March until I took that thing out in May. So she was on it for multiple months. Just, those things aren't meant for long-term use. Right. It's extremely irritating. But what happened was, I feel like there was lack of oversight of her feeding. And I didn't know anything about this world. So I was just, trying to learn as I went. And she was basically to her goal feeds, which I remember was 90 mLs. That's 3 ounces. Her goal feed by taking bottle by mouth was 90 mLs. And by the at very end of our hospital stay, she basically was there. But they didn't allow me to take the NG tube out. So we went home on it. And to be home with a baby on an NG tube, they acted like it was no big deal. But she would pull it out and I couldn't place it. They teach you how to do it, but you try to do that at home by yourself with a wailing baby, and I ended up having to take her into the emergency room.
That sounds impossible.
So what happened was it got to the point where Annie was vomiting 5 to 8 times per day.
Oh, gosh.
And I was concerned about her lack of calorie intake, her lack of hydration, and her lack of her medications absorbing. It was extremely stressful. I mean, I was giving her a bath and changing her clothes constantly on top of everything else, on top of the doctor's appointments. And I told the pediatrician, I was like, we can't keep doing this. We've got to figure this out. And she prescribed a nausea medication.
Yeah.
Just add another medication to the list. And I remember thinking, but why is this happening? Like, I don't want to mask this. I want to figure out why.
Let's fix it. Yeah.
And thank God I took Annie. She had an ENT appointment. And I told the ENT what was going on. And she said, Annie has a sinus infection from that NG tube being down her nose and throat for this long of time. Take it out. And we need to let the infection heal. And I was like, I have permission. I can take it out. And she was like, yes, I give you permission. If that appointment hadn't happened, literally that was the beginning of the awakening, like the fixing her oral aversion, because all that had happened during that period of time from when we got out of the hospital to that day was she started taking her bottle less and less. And the more she went and take the bottle, the more I pushed it and forced it, because I had to take her in every single week for a weight check. I would get physically, my stomach, I guess my body manifested the stress in my stomach, and it started when she was in the CICU.
Yeah.
But I would get physically ill in my stomach before every weight check. And even though every appointment she either gained or was the same weight, it wasn't the amount that doctor wanted. And so she said it wasn't enough. And if I look back at pictures and I just see my fat little baby, but for whatever reason, we couldn't look at the child. We had to look at the growth chart. She had to be doing what every other baby was doing. And we couldn't consider what she had been through. Or ask me how feeding therapy was going. That was never brought up. And guess what? We weren't in feeding therapy because I couldn't find anyone to help, which is another big piece of the feeding hole in the system. So that's when the battle of Annie getting a G button began. And this doctor was determined that Annie would need it. And I was, at that point, not convinced that she did. And the more that went on, the more, the stronger I stood my ground. She's not even losing weight. We just need to get her through this. And, she was not dehydrated. I was keeping track of every wet diaper. We did blood work. Her labs were perfect. She wasn't deficient. And so she was like, well, Courtney, you have to take her to a pediatric surgeon up at the hospital for a basically pre-op evaluation, so that if it gets really bad, she can go in and have it right away. And I said, okay, I'll go. It was a consultation. That's what it was. I'll go and I'll consult with the doctor. So I take her in, and he examines her, and he's like, oh, she has a pacemaker in her abdomen. And, she's little, and this pacemaker is about the size of I don't know. It's about a 3-inch diameter, I would guess.
Okay.
And you can just see it. You can just see it because it bulges out a little bit. I said, okay, what does that mean? And he said, well, typically placing a G button, it's really, very straightforward procedure. We do it laparoscopically. And However, in Annie's case, where this pacemaker is going to affect my ability to do that. So her scar on her chest from her heart, he was going to have to start at the bottom of that scar and extend it all the way to her belly button.
Oh my gosh.
Open her up. He called it old school style. And fill her with air. And the problem is that Annie has pulmonary hypertension, which is a heart and lung combo. I can't remember if we discussed that in the last episode.
I think you did.
Did I?
Spencer mentioned it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's our big, that's been our biggest challenge, medically since that time. And so he said, when I do that, it can put more unnecessary pressure on her heart and lungs and send her into a pulmonary hypertension crisis. And I thought, okay, well, before I wanted to say no to this surgery, and now I want to say hell no to the surgery.
Right.
Like, that puts her at risk. And so I was more determined than ever to get her over this oral aversion. So we went back to the pediatrician, and I still to this day don't understand. It didn't change her mind on her needing the G button. And the moment when I knew she could no longer be Annie's doctor was when she said, quote, "It is a matter of time before she fails." And I was like, okay, well, you just, I guess, made it easy for me to know what to do. I have to find a new doctor.
Yeah.
And that was so hard because I didn't want to leave her. I didn't want to search for a new doctor. But I knew I had to. It made it very cut and clear. I couldn't believe that a doctor would just like give a child basically, no chance, just assume that they can and they won't. And guess what? Annie did. So she was wrong.
Way to go, Annie. She's just stacking up the wins over here.
It was, even finding a new pediatrician, I felt like we were discriminated against because of her medical history. One local doctor told me that Annie sounded like a, quote, complicated nugget. She doesn't know that I know that was said, but I did know that was said, and that she was just fine with the doctor she was with.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So
let me ask you, because, again, I haven't gone through a lot of this stuff,
mm-hmm.
and I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't, but there's so many who do. What's your first step there? And I know I ask this a lot, but in this case, how is it that you find not only the courage to go away from a doctor who you kind of had a level of comfort with,
mm-hmm.
But to challenge that, right? Like to kind of challenge the authority there.
It is terrifying to be in disagreement with a physician, because I was just talking about this last week because my friend's son is underwent open heart surgery number 3, and you're going to have her on.
I would love
because it is an incredibly powerful story of exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
The balance of respecting a physician's education, experience, expertise in their career, and listening to your mom gut and believing in yourself and that you know your child, and, speaking up. Basically, if a doctor isn't willing to be have you on the team, that's a pretty big red flag.
That's a good thing to call out for folks, because I think maybe that's the way to look at it is what are the red flags for you, at least,
mm-hmm.
for these kinds of situations. Now, you've been to numerous specialists,
mm-hmm.
doctors, surgeons. The list is long, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what is it? What are these red flags? Obviously, if they're not including you on the team, that's a huge red flag. But what are some others?
Gosh.
Well, let me ask this, kind of to further the question.
Okay.
When a doctor tells you that it's just a matter of time for your kid like that,
mm-hmm.
what that to me is a huge red flag. If
It was, yeah.
if you're my doctor, or you're my child's doctor, your job is to be the biggest optimist. Sure, you've got to be a realist at some point behind some scenes.
I think that doctors were afraid of Annie because on paper she was so medically complex, and they just, I know with the G button, it's having the option of a G button is amazing. We have so many friends that have them, and it is a huge resource to feed a child. However, I can't speak to every situation, but I can speak to ours, and I could tell that it was the easy way out for that doctor to know exactly how many mLs my child was getting. And I told her, I said, but even when she gets the G button, she's still going to have the oral aversion, and we need to work on that. Like it doesn't, I don't want her to have it all of her life. She has to learn how to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And another red flag was that she said, at this point, Annie was 8 months old. And, not only, so there's the bottle, but then, you have to start working on solids, on food. And so I was working on purees with her, and she said there was so much lack of knowledge and education. She said that Annie eating purees was empty calories, and I needed to stop working on that. So, and just focus on the bottle. And once I did find our incredible feeding therapist, she was like, no, like you have this window of time developmentally when they're this age where if you don't introduce these things and use these techniques, you just don't want to do that. So that was my suspicion, and I'm not an expert, but then the feeding therapist, basically confirmed what I thought to be true. Yeah. And so that was a huge part of getting over this feeding challenge.
Well, you had to help her get over the oral part.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was also the constipation issue.
Okay, so...
Right.
Yes. So we got over the oral aversion, and it was a combination. The feeding therapist didn't really help me with the bottle. Like, I figured that out on my own. And I researched, and I read a specific book that I would recommend to mothers called Your Baby's Bottle Aversion. It's a very straightforward title. I think we need that one right now. Written by a nurse out of Australia. And it taught me so much. And I, used information from that to help me. And we got in feeding therapy. And Annie never did take purees. That, finally, her therapist and I agreed, okay, it's time to, I remember she said, we need to be more aggressive. And so we started with other foods. Because Annie has dysphagia, the swallow dysfunction, there was, some hesitation and fear there by anyone in the medical field, but she can handle foods perfectly fine. So it took a lot of me speaking up and being like, no, she can do this, and this is what she's doing, and this is what we've practiced. And, I would sit in front of that high chair and do every oral, motor exercise that the therapist taught me 3 times a day. I had to keep it positive because a lot of what I learned from the book, a lot of the oral aversion came from that pressure of, tensing my muscles and pushing the bottle and like, you have to take this. If you don't take this and you don't weigh enough, we're going to get in trouble. And so I learned that I would put on music. set my phone on the table and like create a happy atmosphere and keep it a positive experience for Annie. So she didn't associate being in the high chair with like negative.
Yeah.
So our next to finally get to the GI part, much like the feeding challenges, because of hypotonia, low muscle tone also affects the ability to digest food because it takes muscles to digest food. So all from the very beginning, constipation had been an incredibly big challenge for Annie, but it was always like, lower on the list because we're, dealing with
some pretty high
heart
priority things,
and, dysphagia of the swallow and feeding. And so finally I was able to have the time to really examine what we were doing and question and try to make changes. So we were finally able to, we weren't even able to get in with a GI doctor because the wait was so long. So we were able to see a PA, and we tested I say this so everyone understands how severe her constipation was. She went in for a biopsy, where they took a sample to see if basically there was something called Hirschsprung's disease, which, if I remember correctly, it's like where the nerves aren't working properly in the lower part. I think like where the end of the intestine meets the rectum. And so they wanted to make sure she didn't have that. So there was like an anatomical issue causing it. So we went through that, and a nurse called me and said, "Hi, Mrs. Morey. So the results of the biopsy came back and Annie does not have Hirschsprung's disease." And I said, "Okay, well,
that's a good thing.
That's good. But we still have this issue at hand. So what's next?"
Right.
And she said, "Oh, just keep giving her Miralax and keep doing what you're doing." And like she was going to hang up. And I was like, "Oh my gosh. No.
End of conversation.
Yeah. And I was like, first of all, the Miralax isn't even totally effective. We're still having to use like these glycerin suppositories, and like she is hurting and like she's not okay. Like I'm not good with this. Like I want to come in and talk about this more." And she was like, "Well, like, what do you want to talk about? Like it is what it is." And I remember where I was driving for this conversation. And so I remembered I messaged the PA, I want to say, and they were basically like, "Yeah, just a cap full of Miralax every day." And so at this time, Annie was, eating. This was November. This was November of 2021. So Annie was 13 months old at this time. And I don't want to say I'm grateful that they pushed me to a point of like a hard, almost like that pediatrician, like they made it easy for me to know. But it did push me to what I did with her, because I was like, okay, well, I grabbed the bottle of Miralax, and like I told you, I looked at it and it said, not approved by the FDA for use under the age of
probably
18.
Or 18 months. Yeah. Oh, 18 years?
18 years.
Oh my God.
Not 18 months. And it also said not for use, not for long-term use, like do not use like over 7 days. And here I am, every doctor we've come in contact with throughout has recommended to my, when we got out of the CICU, she was 6 months old, for long-term use. Like there was no end in sight. And when I looked at that bottle and read the label, I was like, wait, how can this be?
Yeah.
And so, so that's what started us on the journey of using food to heal Annie's gut. And it's still like the coolest thing to me, getting her over her oral aversion and then getting her over her extreme constant constipation are like the two greatest accomplishments in my life, because they both seemed impossible.
Yeah.
And I got no help on both.
Yeah.
So I just,
like, what's your first step at that point? Like, okay, this is not okay. Miralax, 18 years or older.
so I remember thinking, well, I have to feed her.
Something.
I have to feed her anyways, so I
Yeah.
might as well just see if this can work. And I do have 2 local friends who are dietitian, like expert level dietitians, and Taylor is actually a PA or a what's the other one? There's PA and NP. I think she's an NP, a nurse practitioner. And I asked both of them for so much guidance and help. You know, because I want I want knowledge. I want to do things right that are safe, but you know, it's just sad how limited the medical world is on using food to better the body.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because, I don't know, a lot of reasons. You know, our country as a whole has just a history of terrible, I don't know when that started, you know, I guess when in the 70s when the TV dinner became a thing. And, you know,
choosing
foods we grew up on, foods of the 90s.
Yeah.
When the microwave became, you know, the appliance of choice. It's all about, you know, our culture is just go, 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 busy, busy, busy. And healthier foods cost more. You know,
not only money, but time in a lot of cases. You know,
right.
To prepare a meal with whole foods takes longer than to microwave dinner that thing. Right.
So, I just very strategically started feeding Annie. I went, I guess you could say, the more extreme route. I knew that dairy, no matter who you are, is hard on the digestive system. I mean, everyone knows it's like, oh, there was charcuterie at that party and I ate so much cheese, like, you know, constipation jokes. Like, dairy is just hard on GI. And so I was like, okay, we're going to cut out dairy. And I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, this seems like, am I going to be able to do this? But I was like, I can do anything for Annie. Like, if we've made it this far. And it was just, I don't know. Sometimes I look back and I'm shocked by myself, because I feel like Courtney prior to Annie wouldn't have had the guts to do it. But I guess when you're in a position where you're so desperate, you know, so I cut out dairy for her. And I cut out gluten for her. And I took away certain ingredients and I strategically put in certain ingredients. And literally within a week, Annie was, I couldn't even tell anyone because I felt like I didn't want to jinx it. Like, I didn't even share the good news with even my mom friends and like my family, because I was like, well, what if this is just like a coincidence? Yeah. And I think like on the second week, I was like, you guys, I literally cannot believe that it's just what I'm feeding her. This child who was biopsied for a disease, who, you know. And I was just so overjoyed because I didn't see her suffer from being constipated anymore. Yeah. And she loved and enjoyed food. So it was just like a total win. And it really wasn't as hard as I thought. Like, once I, you know, had my list of what to feed her, and of course, her not being a picky eater was a huge part of it. But I also think when you feed your child in this way when they're so young, you know, they don't know any different. Granted, I know because of my 4-year-old, children regress and go through picky stages. So, you know, I know that happens. But so far, so good with Annie. She went from being the worst eater to the actual best eater. I
That's
wish that Wells
amazing.
ate like Annie. So one of the biggest helps were the smoothies. And smoothies are so amazing because you can just put whatever you want into them and blend it, and it's just all there. And another reason smoothies were so good for Annie is because, you know, with her dysphagia, with her trouble swallowing thin liquids, the thicker the better.
Yeah.
And a smoothie is very thick.
Yeah.
So I broke it down into these 6 categories. I even made this visual chart that I would send to moms, and I have it like all saved on my Instagram. It's been like the number one topic on my Instagram page is constipation. And I know I'm known as the poop mom, and I wear that badge with honor.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, it, like I told you earlier, it feels like constipation is this taboo topic. No one wants to talk about poop. That's weird. I like me especially. But
it's a problem. And if it's a problem, you gotta find a solution
for children and adults.
Yeah.
And not only has it worked on Annie, it has worked on I feel so successful as a human when other moms tell me that it has helped their children too.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. And I've learned so much about nutrition. And so I still make smoothies for her. The amazing thing is that because of using whole foods in this way that Annie eats, like in the beginning, it was really intense, and I was really having to use a lot of like flaxseed oil and really staying on top. And you like just really sticking to the plan. And her body has regulated so much. Like, she's still gluten and dairy free, but I don't have to use as much intervention. Like, she used to get a smoothie every single day, and now, you know, it's less, and she's okay.
Yeah.
She has regular bowel movements. And then I do want to mention another huge aid. It was a product that a mom shared with me called High Fiber, and it was not a laxative. It's not a medication. It's a dietary supplement, and it's just a source of fiber in liquid form that's extremely easy and efficient for a child to take. I mix Annie's in with her dairy-free coconut yogurt, and she loves it. And that was also like a really big, effective, that's something that I share with moms too, is it's the only one that was, you know, natural and safe and effective. So I have to mention that because it has helped us. And that's another thing we've been able to use less of. But if we find her, you know, where she hasn't had a bowel movement in 48 hours, we'll just be sure to give her some of that to help. So it's just extremely eye-opening.
Yeah. Well, and that's been my main takeaway from all of these experiences that you've shared. You would, or at least I would expect, I think most people probably would expect, that these areas, these hospitals, these specialists, all these places are the ones with the answers,
mm-hmm.
right? You know, and not to bring up touchy topics from society over the last couple of years, but you know, we've demonstrated that we do hold these folks that are in medical positions and that have medical expertise in a very high regard,
mm-hmm.
and we have high expectations of them because of that.
Right.
When you're telling me some of this stuff about some of the simplest things being overlooked, it's very disheartening. Because it's an expectation unfulfilled, right? So it's a letdown, and it really does make me wonder. All right, well, why are these things happening, and why can't we trust? And easy out there, everybody. But in these situations, like where you're, we're zoomed into, Annie and what she's got going on,
Mm-hmm.
and you're talking to somebody who should have answers, and Miralax is the answer. How is that? How is that the answer?
Yeah, and it's not like it's just Annie specific. That's how it is everywhere.
Yeah.
Like all pediatric hospitals. That's everyone. That's what the answer is. And like I said, it wasn't even that effective for her.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, give her more. And I was like, I don't know. I think that I'm going to try something else.
When the label says 18 years or older, we're not even in the same universe here. You're
That's what's so hard is Western medicine saved my daughter's life.
right.
So I very much want to, acknowledge that. But it's like there has to be more of a middle ground on this. And I see it. Like I see it with functional medicine becoming more readily available and popular. These kinds of doctors.
I would say you're doing something to establish that.
I mean,
that
it's just
ground.
Annie's testimony. I know. I know.
But seriously though, I mean, now you have a pretty strong following and a lot of medical mamas that are
Mm-hmm.
looking to you and for inspiration, but also information.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're able to take that information you were given
Mm-hmm.
and decide that's not good enough, it's kind of a summarization of that, but right, that's not good enough. So I'm going to find a better solution, more effective solution, whatever it may be. And you do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that's not to take away from Western medicine getting Annie to where she is, but there's clearly a need for something else.
Let's finish what happened next, because that's the part that's so disheartening. Is we had a scheduled appointment with her with GI, and I was so excited to go into that appointment. Like I had made this little, I took time to make this summary of what I had done. And the nurse was like, well, how's she doing on, I don't know if she asked how she's doing on Miralax, but I think just in general, how is she doing? I was like, she's doing so well. We're so grateful. She's thriving. She has no constipation issues anymore. And her eyes got big. And she was like, oh, like, tell us what you've done. And at this point, the PA had come in. And I was like, okay, I'm doing this. And, I just took this away and I added this in. And she's taking notes and my heart rate went up. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. Like, what if this can implement change? And, all I wanted was for another option to be offered to families instead of just one option. And it was very exciting. And she was like, okay, I'm going to send the dietitian in after me. And I want you to tell her everything you just told me. And it's just so strange. The dietitian came in and I'm speaking and she's not responding at all. She's just like smiling at me and nodding, but like with this strange smile. And I'm thinking, what are you thinking right now?
Yeah.
Like she's not having the same reaction that the PA was, and she's not taking notes. And I remember her being like, well, Miralax is offered because it's a cost-effective solution for parents, and, mentioned something about convenience. And I was like, listen, I totally get that. If that's what a parent chooses, that's their prerogative, and then that's what they're going to do. But why can't we share information and offer something else? And so I remember I just stopped talking because she wasn't responding and I felt really uncomfortable. I remember I just started like packing our things up and I was like, okay, well, thank you. And I was like, well, that was strange. And so I messaged the PA, like a follow-up message on the MyChart, and she responded, and it was a total change in attitude and response. And she said, well, at this time, we appreciate you sharing, but that's not something that our clinic can share with families because there's no research behind what you've done and there's no scientific study. And I was flabbergasted, and I was like, it's
behind food. Yeah.
Like, what? Then why do you have dietitians? Like, I'm not trying to, speak about some strange potion or
right.
and also it was just so hypocritical because there hasn't been a study done by the FDA on Miralax either, but that's
especially in infants
being used.
Yeah.
Like, there's no long-term study. That was I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me, and I haven't had the time to, it's on the laundry list, the long list of things to address. But it's on there because how a child eats and what they eat are now, those two things are like one of my biggest advocacy focuses. Because it's just so important to a child's, like I said, to get her to the point of being able to have open heart surgery. All that mattered was she feeds and like grows and gains and like weight, like, with the pediatrician, everyone's obsessed with it. And yet the technique of how to eat and what we eat, there's not enough support and options for families like ours. So I'll never just be able to like let it go and move on. And it would be easy to, because now, so much has changed, so much life has happened. But for all the other families, I will still get messages of moms whose children are 6 months old. And it just reminds me, like, it's obviously it's still such a problem and needs to be addressed. So
yeah. Well, and you're starting to do that, right? That's what we talked about here, is you're starting to address those issues, but without you explaining these stories, your other folks are not going to be encouraged. They're not going to have that inspiration and that courage to speak up or to even assume that there's another option. And that's the part that I think is, I don't want to call it criminal, but it's terrible.
It's just such a huge mess. And Miles, our recent hospital stay, we had a hospital stay last month in July for Annie got a respiratory virus, and it hit her really hard because her lungs are more fragile. And so much of, keeping her GI moving is fruits and vegetables with fiber. And there were 3 whole fruit options on the menu. And I was like, well,
what's the point?
No wonder kids aren't, like, food is medicine. It's science. Why is that so hard to see?
We've been doing this a while, right? Y'all, we've been on this rock blowing through space for a while.
And
Food's
I'm not
important.
Some like extremist mom who is like, like so
anti-medicine,
or just,
all that.
Like a health food nut.
Yeah.
But Annie has taught me so much about how much this really matters and the real effects it can have on a body.
Yeah. Well, and we've had other conversations on this podcast about similar things, and it's not necessarily about a specific diet. I don't think got to be keto or, whatever it is, whatever the trendy diet is. In my experience, just kind of as a person trying to navigate this world, it's more about trade-offs, right? And you, I think, mentioned that a little bit. Is there were certain areas where I'm just trading off, and we're gonna get this swapped in here for this, and it wasn't necessarily that you had 100% solution. It was just that, like, look, this is better than this, so let's try it. And how valuable that can be and how much it can stack up over time too, over trade-offs. If just a normal person can swap out all their soda and sweet tea for water over the course of a year.
Yeah, and it's not just benefiting her GI. It is, brain development.
Yeah.
It is immunity. And that is obviously so important for her because she is more at risk for, those for those viruses hitting her harder. So we need to keep her fueled with the best stuff. And, it's funny that we have a team of 12 physicians and no one talks about food. No one asks me about it. No one brings it up. Just isn't. It's just not.
It's bizarre.
It is.
It's bizarre. I mean, it's almost, it's like a mechanic not knowing anything about oil,
Yeah.
Like you go to your mechanic, you need more oil. What kind? Like how much? I don't know. Good luck.
Yes.
Okay. Shouldn't you know something about this? That very disheartening. But again, I think that the work you're doing and the way you're speaking up and the way you're at least just willing to search for more solutions is incredibly inspirational, but important. You're giving courage to these other moms that might not have that, and they are certainly going through it. I think that's a guarantee that there's plenty of mamas out there that'll be going through this. And so what would you tell those moms right now that if they're going through, maybe it's nothing specific, but your child has an issue, you're not sure about the answers you're getting, what would...
Just ask questions, and if there's something that has been on your heart or your mind to try, you probably need to try it. Just be brave.
Trust mama's intuition.
Yes. And do the healthy thing, whether that's mental or physical or spiritual, choose the healthy thing. I know that's very broad, but...
Well, it's kind of the nature of the podcast, is
right.
Natural remedies,
right,
and we've certainly talked about specific ones, but the point is that these are extreme situations, and really, like you've mentioned, y'all haven't really come out of it. I think it's fair to say things have gotten better.
Oh, yeah.
But any time like you experienced last month, you could be right back in that hospital. And so I don't know that it gets more extreme than that. I mean, I'm sure that it does, but everybody's relative, and
right.
with what you guys are going through, for natural remedies to be something that has not just been effective, but has been for you, for Spencer, for Annie,
mm-hmm.
And even you could probably make a case for Wells, right? Social interaction being a natural remedy too, family time, friend time, all of that. But to kind of hone in on it, natural remedies are not only available, not only effective, but incredibly important when we're going through these situations. Backs against the wall, our energy's depleted, our whatever, nutrients are depleted. You're not going to wake up feeling good when that's the case. You are going to have to find something to fuel you and push you forward to overcome these situations. And that's what I think is so neat about y'all's story, is you've just done that every step of the way, and you've never, I'm sure you have, right, been discouraged, but you've never hesitated to pick back up, put one foot in front of the other, and here we go again.
I mean, more discouraging moments than, just getting out of the doctor's office and getting her in her car seat and turning the car on and crying. Because sometimes it feels like, and it's funny, it has nothing to do with Annie and her medical challenges. It has to do with people listening or caring or just helping.
Yeah.
But I mean, for every person who hasn't really heard us, there's two that have. And I've I've talked with every single one of her doctors. Like, I will take the time in the appointment to speak to other things, and I'm just amazed by the majority of her team genuinely caring and listening. And I have amazing relationships with her physicians, and then the ones that I don't, like, we'll never go back to that specialist.
Yeah. But somebody will, and that I think is kind of the unfortunate part, and where I illustrated earlier, it's a letdown.
When I say that, we'll never go back as patients for help in that way, but I will be going back on an advocacy level, because I just don't accept what I was told. I think that more people need to hear it, and they need to hear more. And that was so early on, now we're, 9 months of this being success and her thriving. I mean, she's a miracle on so many levels. So.
Yeah, and Spencer and I got to get into that a little bit too. What a miracle Annie has been, and some of the work that she's done for people of faith, or maybe who didn't have faith, and it's so powerful, and that's why I think at least me, why I embrace natural remedies. I have strong faith, right, in God, and I believe that the things God provided here have purpose. We can get stuff out of these things, y'all. It's pretty simple for some of it, right? An orange has a lot of good stuff in it. Lemons have a lot, bananas,
right.
All these things. Nobody would look at those and go, oh, those could be dangerous, So we're not, but we're also overlooking some of the most amazing things about these things.
Yeah.
And, underplaying them or not believing that those things could be real remedies. And to me that part is tragic, and we need to do something to reverse that. It's not hard. Drinking water, eating nutritional things, getting out and breathing some oxygen, absorbing some sunlight. Those are things that are accessible to all of us. And I think a lot of us take those things for granted. But when you are put in a situation with Annie, with yourselves, where you have no choice but to figure it out, it's so cool to see natural remedies step up and be kind of the hero throughout, in all these different ways, and probably more. Like we've joked about, we're going to have to just have you come back and give us updates.
Yeah.
Because certainly Annie's story is very early on. We got a lot more to experience there. And we've been going for a while now. We got to get to the kids and to dinner and all the mama duties. We can't take you away for too long.
Do.
But is there anything that you would want to leave everybody with after all of this?
Just to touch back on, you should, for any parent out there, you should be respected for the way you care for and love your child, and you should be, you should have a seat at the table, and, speaking up is going to take more time and take more energy, and it's not always going to, go your way, but when it does, you see how worth it is for, whether it's your child's health or your health or whatever the situation is. I think that we are more capable than, we don't give ourselves enough credit. And that, so much of the Down syndrome community platform is, giving our kids a chance and like believing in them. And so, if I'm going to speak that, about my daughter, like I have to live that too.
That's right. And
so, yeah, I guess just that.
Excellent. I think that's perfect. That's a great way to cap it off. And I echo that, right? For everybody, believe in yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of things that we have available to us that if we just, you know, look for them,
Mm-hmm.
they're right there. So, well, thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you for finding the time. Thank you for finding the energy to relive some of these things. But mostly, thank you for what you're doing. You know, I'm on your Instagram all the time. We're following along with all these other stories that you've gotten, and you've mentioned a few of them. But just on behalf of all of those medical mamas that I know are doing the same thing and following along, thank you. And
Well,
I
thank you
hope
for
that
the opportunity, because it is slightly therapeutic.
yeah, you know, getting to talk through these things for
Mm-hmm.
sure. But just what you're doing on a daily basis, though, finding the energy, not only again for all the things we talked about with Annie and all that, and what y'all are doing, but for these other people who are going through it. You know, the case in New York, and now that you're going to Boston next week, or this week, you're going to Boston this week.
This week on
For
Wednesday.
that. And I'm over here looking like, gosh, where does she find the time for all of this?
Well,
It's
and
crazy.
you know, I couldn't do all that. Like, it's a combination of the kids being in this amazing school that they're in and having a very capable, like it wasn't even a conversation. Spencer was just like, of course you should go. And what we're talking about is my very best heart mom and Down syndrome mom friend. Her son just had his 3rd open heart surgery last Thursday. So he's 5 days out now. And I'm just going up there to be, you know, some extra hands, because they have 3 boys and it's a lot to do with just 2 people. She needs the help, and she has been there for me in my hardest times, and like, you know, now truly like a sister. And so I'm really grateful that we, you know, that we're able to make it work for me to go up there and be with her at one of the, if not the best children's hospital in our country. And it'll be exciting just to see how they do things and what it's like.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's so cool. And hopefully we get to learn more about that story on this podcast. To be determined.
Do it.
Well, thank you so much, Courtney. And just please keep doing what you're doing. And hopefully we get to hear more about it here very soon. And thank you all for listening. I hope you all enjoyed listening to Courtney's story. And most of all, we want you to feel better today. Thanks, everyone.